He wasn't shy, or weak, or insecure. But as soon as she walked into the room, something in him began to falter. It wasn't fear, it was too much intensity compressed into a body he'd never learned to express without seeming out of place. While others laughed loudly, struck up conversations with banal phrases, and casually touched her arm, he simply observed. He saw what no one else saw. The discomfort in her shoulders, the microsecond of hesitation in her smile, the desperate attempt to appear disinterested when, in truth, she wanted to be noticed. And even realizing all this, he stood there, silent, feeling that any word would sound forced, ill-timed, out of place. It's not about cowardice, it's about depth. And depth, in a world that rewards the shallow, is almost a social curse. Carl Jung said that certain men are born with their eyes turned inward. They are the so-called introverted intuitives. For them, life isn't a stage for performances, it's a mirror for deciphering truths. But while the world revolves around stimuli, quick responses, and instant validation, these men lose themselves in an excess of perception. They sense the environment, absorb the unsaid, translate emotions into symbols. But no one understands. And then arises the cruelest loneliness, that of those who are not invisible, but rather misunderstood. From an early age, these men are labeled different. At school, while other boys stood out for their bravado and power struggles, they immersed themselves in books, thoughts, and existential questions. While one wanted to kiss the most popular girl in class, he wondered if that kiss meant anything beyond physical touch, if it would bring belonging, connection, or simply confirm their inability to feel part of what everyone else seems to value effortlessly. And when they tried to explain themselves, the world laughed. Or worse, the world looked away. This is the first pain of the profound man, being seen as weak for being sensitive, as antisocial for being selective, as indecisive for overthinking. But in truth, everything about him is excess, of analysis, of meaning, of feeling. And what for most is just another night at a bar, for him is a storm of micro-interpretations, internal pressures, and mental loops that slowly crush him. But the paradox is brutal, because deep down, he knows he has something rare. He feels a magnetism there, dormant. That, if someone truly saw him, they might even fall in love. But that chance almost never comes, because he lacks social timing, doesn't know how to flirt with cliches, nor can he fit into the theatricality of modern conquest. The woman looks at him, perhaps curiously, but after seconds of hesitation, she gives up, and goes for the guy who talks nonsense with confidence, who says what he wants without thinking about the impact, who flows with the lightness of someone who doesn't feel the weight of the world, and he stays. Watching? Again, Freud would call this pathological autoeroticism, as if this entire internal universe were a diversion and escape. Jung counters, this is structure. It's emotional biology. The profound man didn't choose to be this way. He was born with a mind that translates everything into meaning. And this mind, this gift, doesn't fit into shallow spaces, into quick conversations, into validation games. That's why he suffers. Not because he's weak, but because he's too big for the emotional structure that modern seduction offers. And here's the cruel contradiction. The more he feels, the more silent he becomes. Because he knows that if he expresses what he truly perceives, he'll seem crazy. Exaggerated. You're tripping, she would say, if he told her how he felt the energy shift when she crossed her arms, or how he realized she was talking about an ex with a smile but crying with her eyes. And then he falls silent. He swallows, and begins to build an invisible prison where his mind is its own executioner. Worse, his silence isn't neutral. It's interpreted, like arrogance, disinterest, apathy, when in reality, it's excessive care, burden, and emotional complexity. And with each new failed attempt at interaction, it reinforces the belief that they're undesirable, that they have no value in the social game, that they need to change or disappear. But is it necessary? Herein lies the beauty hidden in the chaos. These men are not less capable. They are misplaced. In a world where conquest has become a race for attention, the value of depth disappears, until someone is ready to dive. The problem is that, in order to dive, one must first know how to swim on the surface. And that is what these men lack. They were born in the depths, but never learned to float. The deep mind is like a temple, full of echoes, symbols, and silences. But no one rushes into a temple. One must know how to invite, create space, And the silent man needs to understand this. His mistake is not being too deep. It is wanting others to dive before showing that there is something there. He needs to create a bridge, not an abyss. And to do so, he must first accept that he will not be understood immediately. That yes, his silence can push away, but it can also attract, if charged with the right energy. Nietzsche said that what is done out of love is beyond good and evil. And it's precisely because of love for truth, for authenticity, for the intensity of connection, that these men become so frustrated. Because what they want isn't easy sex, nor empty validation. They want to be read as they are. They want someone to see their soul behind their silent eyes. But this expectation, in a game where appearances are more important than essence, almost always ends in pain. And then they disappear. They withdraw. They pretend they don't care. They create social personas to appear light, cool, normal. But inside, the abyss grows. The problem is no one notices, because they're too good at hiding it. Their pain doesn't scream, it's silent. It doesn't bleed, it corrodes. And when it explodes, it comes in the form of existential breakdowns, identity crises, or simply abandonment. They give up the game. They convince themselves that this isn't for me. And they live isolated in a world they continue to analyze, but no longer try to touch. But what if silence weren't the end? What if it were a seed? Jung believed that these men carry within them the symbols of the collective unconscious, dreams, archetypes, universal truths. And that's why they suffer so much, because they perceive more than they can translate. But also because of this, they carry an almost mystical potential for connection. But this potential needs to be honed. It needs to find form. They need to learn to use silence as a dramatic pause, not as an absence. To use their gaze as a presence, not as an escape. To use the right words, few but precise, that create impact, not confusion. The profound mind only becomes a weapon when it learns to play with the time of reality. And the time of reality is superficial, fast, sensory. There's no point in wanting the world to deepen first. The true master is the one who seduces with layers, who delivers lightness on the outside and depth in the final touch. Who understands that a woman first needs to feel lightness, comfort, curiosity, before allowing herself to dive in. Therein lies the challenge of the silent man, to calibrate his density, to create contrast. Show that there's an abyss there, but that it will only be revealed to those who know how to float first. And as much as this may seem like adaptation, it's actually social intelligence. It's not about changing your essence, but about creating a strategic way to express it. Positioning yourself as an enigma, not as noise. Making silence work for you, not against you. At the end of the day, what separates the profound man from the forgotten man is the ability to make his introspection magnetic, not melancholic. To use his pain as an invitation, not a shield. Because yes, he will continue to see what no one sees, feel what no one feels, analyze where no one pays attention. But instead of using this as a reason to hide, he can learn to use it as a power to be remembered. And when that happens, something changes. The gaze stops being hesitant. The silence stops being uncomfortable. And the woman who would previously have walked right past stops, looks back, feels. And for the first time, perhaps she herself doesn't understand why, but something in that silent man pulls her in, something she can't explain. But she feels it. And then the game changes. But what no one talks about is that behind this man's silence, there's a secret code. A system for reading the world that most don't understand because they lack sufficient emotional range. He's not just silent, he's decoding. Every gesture, every slanted phrase, every glance that lasts milliseconds and then shifts away. The world for him is a symbolic battlefield. Where others live, he interprets. And this skill, which in another era would have been that of a shaman, a philosopher, or a prophet, is today seen as weakness, as social backwardness, as a lack of attitude. But attitude for what? To be part of a theater where everyone plays roles they can't sustain for more than 2 encounters? To win a game of superficiality that ends in boredom and emotional escape? The profound man has no interest in winning this game. He wants to change the rules. But herein lies the abyss. Women don't want new rules. They want to feel. And feeling demands a surface that the profound man doesn't know how to build. He's always too immersed. And when he realizes it, he's already sunk alone. The greater tragedy is that he's not the only one. There's a legion of men living in the same psychological limbo, all with intense gazes, souls charged with meaning, hearts saturated with stories no one has heard. All silent, all waiting for someone to see them for who they are, but never revealing who they are. Waiting to be discovered as if they were secret maps. But forgetting that, in the world of seduction, no one has time to decipher maps. They want shortcuts. They want pleasure. They want a quick game. And here a new dilemma arises. If he tries to play games, forces himself to be light, to be funny, to be extroverted, he betrays himself. And this self-abandonment is even more devastating than rejection. Because he doesn't just lose the woman, he loses himself in the process. And this is the kind of loss that doesn't heal with another woman. It heals with transformation, with reconnection, with strategy. Because only when he understands that his depth is a sword and not a burden does he begin to move with another kind of energy. It is at this moment that the silent turning point is born. The point at which a man realizes he doesn't need to be less to fit in. He just needs to know how to show himself. And this requires tactics. It requires mastery of presence. It requires knowing where to look, when to smile, what to keep quiet, and what to give away. Small gestures, meticulously calculated, that create a magnetic field around him. And here the woman feels it. Not because he said something, but because he didn't. Because his silence now has weight, it has form, it has mystery. Society has taught men to compete, to perform, to be quick, assertive, alpha. But it has never taught them to navigate their own unconscious. It has never trained them to seduce with presence, with listening, with strategic sensitivity. This has always been seen as weakness. But Jung was right. These men are not weak. They are living portals between the visible and the invisible world. And if they learn to position themselves, they stop being rejected and become unforgettable. Because in the end, a woman doesn't just want a beautiful body, nor just light conversation. She wants to feel something. Something that takes her out of the cycle of emotional sameness she's already memorized. Something that challenges her without attacking her. That reads her without judging her. That embraces her with his gaze before touching her skin. And this type of man, the modern world has almost eliminated, but he still exists, silent, observing, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. And when that happens, everything around him changes. But it takes courage. Because this process begins with pain, with letting go of the idea of instant acceptance, with the understanding that many will continue to not understand, that many glances will continue to pass by, that some women will prefer the obvious, the loud, the easy, and that's okay. Because depth was never meant for everyone. It was meant for those with the courage to dive in. And the silent man, when he becomes aware of what he carries, begins to change the way he walks, the way he looks, the way he exists. He no longer needs to shout to be seen, nor hide to avoid being judged. He just needs to be whole. And that, in a world of walking halves, is magnetic. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who fights with monsters must watch lest he become one of them." And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. But what he didn't say is that some men are born of the abyss, and they are not devoured, they are forged by it. These are the silent men, the ones who suffer the most, but also the ones who have the most power, if they know how to use it. She didn't reject him for lack of beauty, nor for lack of value. She rejected him because she didn't feel. Because the very second their eyes met, something in her searched for a vibration, an emotional spark, and found none. The problem wasn't him. It was the timing, the speed of stimulation, of surrender, of emotion. He had it all, except the ability to be felt at the right moment. The profound man loses to the superficial, not because he is inferior, but because he acts outside of social time. An attraction, contrary to what logic books say, is not a rational process. It is a trigger, an immediate emotional impact, and whoever triggers it faster wins. Whoever analyzes too much misses the moment. And that's exactly what the introspective man doesn't understand, that a woman doesn't choose based on the best content. She reacts to the best moment. While he thinks, the other acts. While he senses the atmosphere, the other creates the environment. While he considers whether or not to initiate a conversation, the other is already laughing alongside her. Superficiality in this game is a cruel advantage. It allows for lightness, spontaneity, improvisation. And the man who carries the world within himself simply doesn't know how to improvise with the same lightness. Not because he's less capable, but because he carries too many layers. Layers that suffocate when not properly balanced. Imagine a classical painting in a Renaissance museum. Beautiful, complex, full of symbolism and nuances. Now imagine this painting placed in the middle of a noisy, chaotic street fair. Who stops to decipher the work? No one. Because the environment doesn't allow it. The rush, the noise, the stimulation, everything conspires against contemplation. This is exactly what happens to the profound man in a world of immediate interactions. He's a Renaissance painting trying to be understood in a story feed, and the consequences are devastating. Because each failed attempt reinforces the invisible trauma of inadequacy. Every ignored hello, every averted glance, every conversation that dies within a second becomes a microblow to the ego. And the man begins to wonder, is there something wrong with me? He compares himself to others, the coolest, the most talkative, the boldest. He sees how they are chosen, celebrated, remembered, and he, forgotten. Always as the nice guy, the good listener, the too different. But what's at stake here isn't just charisma, it's perceptive structure. The deep man lives in a different semantic field. He doesn't hear what was said, he hears what was hidden. And this inevitably leads him to process each sentence as a riddle. The woman says, "Wow, you're quiet." He hears, "You're not fun enough." She comments, "I like more spontaneous guys." He translates, "You're not desirable." It's not about what she said, it's about what he absorbed. And the drama intensifies, because this type of man rarely shares his pain. He swallows. It transforms rejection into isolation, disappointment into intellectualization, the lack of reciprocity into resignation. And in this process, its intensity, which could be a magnetic volcano, turns into emotional ice. It freezes, and the world, which no longer understands it, begins to ignore it completely. But there's a brutal truth behind all this. The timing of attraction is sensorial, not conceptual, and this destroys the introspective man's mental model. Because he was taught, or taught himself, that content matters, that if he has good ideas, good values, good feelings, he will be chosen. But a woman doesn't choose the way he expects. She chooses by vibration, by frequency, by emotional impact. And this can happen even before the first word. Its body, its energy, its presence. And here's the paradox no one teaches. A woman wants depth, but only after the surface captivates her. She wants substance, but first she needs to feel safe. She wants intensity, but only if it's delivered lightly. The profound man wants to start with the soul, but she needs to start with laughter, with the look, with the chemistry. And if he doesn't understand this, he'll continue to be the right guy at the wrong time. Always. Jung would say that this dissonance arises from the clash between the collective unconscious and the individual unconscious. The profound man operates with symbols, but the modern woman, exposed to a sea of daily stimuli, operates through reactions. She lives in a saturated emotional field where what doesn't pulsate in the first few seconds simply disappears into the noise. And he, who is essence, doesn't know how to transform himself into a stimulus. But this can change, and it needs to, because the problem isn't the introspective man's content, it's the way he delivers it. He presents himself as a thesis when the game demands poetry, as a philosophical essay when the moment demands a catchphrase, like absolute depth when she just wants a light moment of connection. And this isn't a betrayal of identity, it's strategic intelligence. It's knowing that to lead someone to the depths, you must first take a dip in the shallows with elegance. Lightness is not the enemy of depth, it's its gateway. And when the profound man understands this, he begins to adjust his pace. He observes less and experiences more. He controls his instinct for analysis and makes room for error, for improvisation, for the chaos of human interaction. And in this imperfect surrender, he becomes human, desirable, sensible. The superficial man seduces with noise. The profound man needs to learn to seduce with well-placed silence, with active listening that generates curiosity, with looks that create tension and pauses that provoke. A woman doesn't want to be drowned by dense words. She wants to be drawn in by gestures that hint at a hidden ocean. And this game isn't about changing who he is. It's about training how he expresses himself. Most men don't do this because they don't know how. and the few who do know fear being seen as manipulators. But manipulation is distortion. Strategy is alignment. When a man learns to align his density with a woman's emotional timing, he creates magic. He transforms dialogue into dance, presence into palpable energy, listening into a mirror, and then she feels it without knowing why, but she feels it. This is the turning point, when depth learns to disguise itself as simplicity, when the intense mind learns to use short sentences with long intentions, when the analytical heart understands that subtle touches are worth more than rational explanations. It is at this point that the profound man stops being forgotten and starts being remembered intensely. But before that, he needs to break the belief that being himself is enough. Because being yourself without calibrating your delivery is like serving rare wine in a plastic cup. The drink remains noble, but the experience loses value. He needs to be himself, with sensory intelligence, with rhythm adjustment, with emotional mastery. And this is not an innate skill. It is trainable, it is practice, it's feedback, it's exposure to discomfort, and most importantly, it's mental reprogramming. Because as long as he believes he's being rejected for who he is, he'll continue to withdraw. But when he understands he's being ignored for how he presents himself, he gains the power to change, without violating himself, without ceasing to be who he is. And when that day arrives, when he masters the timing, the body, the gaze, and the energy, everything changes. Because the woman doesn't just see what he says, she feels how he's there. And in the silence between one sentence and the next, she begins to realize, this man carries something different. It's not just the way he speaks, it's the way he's silent. It's not just the content of the words, it's the content of the presence, and that's something no superficiality can imitate. The profound man then begins to play a different game, where less is more, where presence is word, where intensity camouflages itself as lightness, and where silence finally becomes music. It's at this point that many give up. They give up not because they want to, but because they feel there's no room for the kind of presence they carry. They think they need to become something else, more extroverted, more performative, funnier, but that's not the solution. The true turning point isn't betraying your essence, but honing it to manifest at the right time. And timing, in seduction, is an art, a dance between presence and provocation, between showing oneself and holding back. The profound man needs to learn to offer clues, not confessions. Suggestions of his intensity, not explicit declarations. Because a woman wants to be led into the mystery, not drowned in it. And this requires a subtle architecture of words, looks, and silences that only those with true depth can sustain without collapsing. The most common mistake is to think you need to talk a lot to be noticed. But there's a stark difference between noise and vibration. Noise distracts. Vibration transforms the environment. A steady gaze, a calculated touch, a well-placed silence are worth more than 1,000 well-crafted speeches. It's what the ancients called dark charm, the energy that emanates from someone who knows more than they let on, and it's irresistible when well-channeled. And when it's well-executed, a woman doesn't just notice, she's drawn in. Because she senses something there that escapes control, predictability, and boredom. The introspective man, when he aligns himself with the game of sensory perception, ceases to be a tiring enigma and becomes a mystery that attracts. And the difference between the two is stark. One demands effort, the other fascinates. This applies even to the simplest conversations. He doesn't need to talk about the cosmos, psychoanalysis, or archetypal symbolism on the first date. He just needs to know how to pause where others would rush, ask a question that pierces without intruding, respond with a half smile when everyone else would respond with a ready-made phrase. These are micro-gestures that build an aura. An aura, in the game of seduction, is crucial. But to do so, he needs to reverse the belief that he needs to explain his depth, because everything that needs explaining loses its magnetism. He needs to embody this depth, live with presence, breathe with elegance, move with precision. This is the language the body understands, that desire recognizes, and that no amount of verbiage can replace. This transition is painful, because the profound man is accustomed to being valued for his content. In the academic world, in the professional world, even in the most intimate friendships, his value lies in what he thinks, in what he perceives, in what he elaborates. But in seduction, the code changes. The value lies in how he makes the other feel. And this shift in axis requires an internal realignment, a rebirth, so to speak. But it is a silent rebirth, without fireworks, without applause, without external validation signs. It is internal, invisible, almost spiritual. It is the moment when he realizes he can be intense without being heavy, that he can be intelligent without being didactic, who can be sensitive without being fragile. And this new identity isn't built overnight. It's trained, refined, cultivated. The profound man who refuses to embrace this process condemns himself to emotional invisibility. He will continue to be seen as interesting, intelligent, introspective, but rarely as irresistible. Because the irresistible in seduction is the one who stirs the senses before reaching reason. And this is an art that can and should be learned. And the key lies in understanding the paradox. For depth to be desired, it must appear light. For intensity to thrill, it must arrive like a touch, not a tsunami. For silence to have impact, it must be accompanied by eyes that speak volumes. And this is only possible when a man stops fighting the game and starts playing by his own rules, but with strategic mastery of hidden language. And at that point, everything changes. The atmosphere changes. Responses change. Attraction changes. Because a woman doesn't just react to what he says, she begins to react to what he emanates. To the silent energy of someone who knows their own worth, but doesn't need to proclaim it. To the calm of someone who carries a world within themselves, but only shows their entrance when they sense the other person is ready to enter. This creates a new kind of seduction. A seduction without performance, without falsehood, without desperate effort. A seduction born from the magnetism of presence, from lightness with density, of the art of calibrating stimulus and mystery, logic and instinct, speech and silence. The man who masters this ceases to be forgotten and becomes unforgettable. And this is the apex of the chapter, the point where the profound man not only understands himself, he transforms himself. He stops trying to adapt to a world that ignores him and begins to shape his own frequency. He no longer wants to be accepted by everyone. He wants to be felt by those who have the reach to perceive what he is. And that is power. It is with this new awareness that he enters the next stage, that of alchemy, the point where suffering becomes a weapon. Silence becomes language. Introspection becomes presence. It's not by shouting that he attracts. It's by being silent with precision. It's not by explaining himself that he seduces. It's by positioning himself with an elegance that doesn't demand validation. The profound man doesn't need to transform himself into something he's not. He only needs to awaken what has always been dormant, his ability to affect without acting, to move without touching, to dominate the emotional realm without even changing his tone of voice. This is the invisible seduction, the secret weapon of those who were rejected for being too intense and who have now learned to transform pain into power. But the first step of this transformation is brutal, because it requires looking at one's own suffering without mercy. It requires facing the silence of childhood, the averted glances of adolescence, the interrupted conversations, the ignored messages, the "you're too much for me," the "I think you're incredible but," and understanding that each wound was a portal, each rejection an invitation, each absence a call to inner alchemy. The ordinary man tries to protect himself from suffering. The profound man, when awakened, decides to use it. He stops asking for love and begins to emanate magnetism. He stops seeking attention and begins to attract curiosity. He stops proving his worth and begins to assert his presence. And this doesn't come from a place of arrogance. It comes from a place of lucidity, from someone who understands that his silence can be more seductive than 1,000 well-articulated words. Because there comes a moment, and it always comes, when a woman looks at him and senses something different there. It's not beauty, it's not status, it's energy. It's the impression that this man has seen things she's never seen. He's felt pain she can't name. He carries stories that will never be told, and yet he's there, present, calm, intense without being aggressive, profound without being heavy, available without being needy. It's at this frequency that the profound man becomes dangerous in the best sense of the word. But this energy doesn't come from formulas. It comes from transmuted wounds, from digested silences, from nights when he questioned everything and decided not to run away. of cycles in which pain didn't turn into bitterness but into clarity. He's not the guy who never suffered. He's the guy who stopped pretending suffering was weakness and transformed it into a lens, a touch, a radar. This is the secret of invisible seduction. There's no script, there's frequency, vibration, presence, and this is built in the dark. The world of conquest values those who shine, but a real woman feels those who radiate. And radiating isn't shouting, it's pulsating. It's occupying the space without invading it. It's creating a field around one's own body where everything seems more intense, denser, more alive. The profound man, when awakened, transforms a walk into a ritual act, a coffee into a meeting of souls, a glance into a gateway to another dimension. She feels this, even if she doesn't understand it, and that's why she approaches. But here's the thing. At this moment, the game isn't over. It's just begun. Because now, he needs to know how to lead. And leading isn't controlling. It's creating space. Space for her to feel safe diving in, even without knowing how to swim. Space for her to say things she's never said. For her to feel things she can't name. For her to trust in a silence that doesn't judge but embraces. And herein lies the paradox. The more he shows himself vulnerable with elegance, the more she feels protected. Because vulnerability isn't weakness. It's transparency without victimhood. It's showing the abyss without asking her to fill it. It's revealing the pain without asking for rescue. The man who does this breaks down all her defenses. Because he asks for nothing but offers everything no other has offered. Truth without demand. Presence without demands. Intensity without chaos. It's in that moment that she surrenders. And not because of logic, but because her body senses that there's something rare there. Something that vibrates outside the norm, something that pulsates from the inside out. It's not what he does, it's who he is. And this is the essence of invisible seduction. It's not about techniques, phrases, or postures. It's about energy condensed into presence. Suffering distilled into power. Profoundness calibrated into desire. And the most incredible thing, it doesn't depend on her, it depends on him, on how he sees himself. If he still believes his pain is a burden, it will be invisible. But if he understands that his pain is alchemy, it becomes inevitable. Because the man who looks a woman in the eye without fear of being seen, that man dominates a territory that others don't even see. Most try to impress. He simply exists. Most try to conquer. He simply radiates. Most try to be remembered. He simply touches and disappears. And in the silence of his absence, she feels more than she ever has in the presence of anyone else. But all of this requires courage, the courage to not explain himself, to not ask permission, to not negotiate his depth. The profound man, when awakened, doesn't force his presence. He offers it like one offering sacred fire. And only those with sufficient emotional range will know what to do with it. Others will call him too intense. They will distance themselves. They will try to put him in boxes. And that's okay, because the man who knows his own worth no longer needs to be understood. He only needs to be felt. And that's why he doesn't compete. He chooses. He doesn't desperately seek attention. He observes. He doesn't show off. He vibrates. And in this stillness charged with power, he ceases to be the excluded and becomes the selector. He ceases to be the rejected and becomes the irreproducible. Because he knows. True seduction isn't about convincing someone to want you. It's about allowing the other person to get closer to their truth. And not everyone is prepared for that. But those who are, they don't forget. And if you've made it this far, it's because something in you has awakened. Maybe it wasn't an exact phrase, but a feeling, a recognition, a pleasant discomfort, as if someone had finally named your pain and revealed that it can be your greatest weapon. But this video, as intense and revealing as it is just the beginning. What you heard here was the map. The next step is practice. It's entering the real arena. It's ceasing to be just someone who understands and becoming someone who transforms. That's why I want to invite you to something that isn't for everyone, but it's precisely for you who have felt that you carry too much intensity, too much depth, and too much presence to continue being ignored. This invitation is the Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds. A direct, provocative, and above all, practical audiobook. In it, you won't find any cliches or empty promises. You'll find applied psycho-emotional strategies designed specifically for men like you, who think too much, feel too much, and have so far been punished for it. This manual isn't about faking it. It's about mastering the language of female desire, even as a silent man. It's about using your gaze as a trigger, your presence as a weapon, and timing as an access code to the most instinctive part of the feminine. It's a natural continuation of this video, but on a more subterranean level, more strategic and more effective. If you want to stop being seen as the nice guy, the overly sensitive one, or the one who doesn't know what to do, the Forbidden Manual is your next move. It will teach you how to transform your depth into instant impact, because desire doesn't wait, it responds, and now it's your turn to provoke the right response. The link is in the description. Click or stay as is.